this is Collaborative Check-ins, and I'm Dr. Lori Badino, and I'm here with Courtney, and she's with KinderClinic, and she's an occupational therapist that I've had the pleasure of working with for many years now, and I'm excited to share our conversation about how to empower parents at this time and learning more about occupational therapy. Thanks, Courtney, for talking with me.
My pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So tell all of us about KinderClinic.
Well, KinderClinic is, I like to call it a boutique clinic because it's just me right now. It's small, very private, and I see one child at a time. So it's very personalized, individualized. They're not distracted by other kids. And I think that's key right now because of COVID I can keep it extra clean, extra safe for the families and my clients. And so, like I said, I'm seeing one child at a time, and we do sensory integration occupational therapy. So my gym looks like a play gym. There's trampolines and swing and climbing structures and pillows. And we also have a fine motor room where we do art, handwriting, things like that.
It's wonderful. I get a lot of questions. I know you know that in my work, I'm constantly collaborating with occupational therapists. I utilize the body and movement in psychology and looking at emotion.
Okay.
And one of the things that comes up is I'm often guiding parents into looking at occupational therapy, not only for motor skills and coordination, but more so for that sensory piece and that modulation work, that the ability to really organize themselves in this environment. And I find that parents don't always know, like, what does that mean? Or how do I even know I'm with an occupational therapist that knows how to do that?
Right.
Yeah. How does that work?
Well, I am seeing clients in the clinic, but I'm also seeing a lot of families through Zoom. And I've actually really been enjoying it because I'm able to work so much more closely with the parents. We spend a lot of time working there. They're the hands-on, I'm just guiding. So I've really enjoyed being able to empower the families, the parents, the moms, the dads, to really understand why we're doing what we're doing rather than just going through the motions of, okay, now we're going to be on the big ball and now we're going to be on the swing. And so really explaining like the proprioception and the vestibular and the visual perceptual and all those pieces that mesh together to create what we call sensory integration. And so that's been really one of the blessings of this interesting situation we're all in, is that the parents are becoming the therapist and they're more empowered to take control of their child's education across the board, just like they are for school. They're also now in charge of therapy and really learning because they're with their kids 24/7. So they need to be able to jump in there in the moment when their child's maybe having a difficult time with schooling or just a meltdown about something else or whatever. They have the tools to actually handle that rather than waiting a week, seeing me in the clinic and be like, okay, so this happened last week. What should have I done? So that's been really nice.
Right. I know it's so important. And I often get that communication from parents of, well, we really want you to come in and be hands-on with our child. And the idea that we can empower parents to learn this is hopefully not that quicker is better, I say, but oftentimes when the parents get those tools, the support is there and the child actually organizes quicker, or the parents are it's less surprising when these upsets happen. It's more predictable. The interventions, you understand one another, so things start to flow. So it's
definitely, and the parents are understanding the underlying concerns that are creating these big upsets or whatever's happening.
Right, and have just a healthier, happier home.
Indeed.
Yeah, and also that I've loved even before COVID going into the home. And so with the virtual experience, you get to be in these homes, and that's where the child is most of the time. They get to use their materials that they already experienced, their timing of what their day looks like. And then it's not just a theory, it's actually like in practice.
Right, most definitely.
Yeah, so when you're thinking about this homeschooling and virtual learning, are there some techniques or strategies that have come up more often right now that you're finding yourself working with families on?
Right. Well, let's see. Definitely like just simple hands-on things like, are you using your fidgets? Are you using your wiggle seat? Are you taking those movement breaks in between, I think a lot of kids are having, let's say, like 3 45-minute classes per day or something like that. And what are they doing in between? Are they sitting on their video games, or are you encouraging them to go do some sort of either structured sensory diet, quote unquote, or just encourage them to go outside, move their bodies? Because a lot of kids, they're tired and they just want to do what they want to do. And so I think there needs to be more structure with, okay, so on this break, we're doing sort of like a PE rather than just taking a break.
Right. Yeah. I do think it's important to set it up. Sometimes it's beautiful to have a flow and just say, oh, but the kids seemed so fine, or they were just focused on the computer. So what's the problem? They weren't crying. There was no upset. So just leave them there. But what we see is that over time, by the end of the day or the end of the next class, they're ready to move, but now it's not available anymore.
Right.
So really to take advantage of those opportunities and really set that child up for success so they can sit for longer periods of time and just feel good in their bodies.
The other thing I was also thinking of is the expectation that some parents have. Why isn't my kid sitting in front of the computer and listening like all these other little ones, like especially the kindergartners, which I'm amazed at some of these kindergartners that they can engage through the computer, but some, they're just not there. Their sensory needs are not allowing them to sit. So I think just setting up the expectation is like, it's okay that he's not in his chair. It's okay that he's under the table, but he's still listening. He doesn't have to be in the screen the whole time. Allow him to be moving while participating in circle time or things like that, because I think we just need to allow for the tools that they need. For example, if a kid like that is in circle time in regular class, he would probably be sitting in a teacher's lap or on a wiggle cushion or on a special chair, like a wiggle chair or something, So I think just allowing that, they don't have to be sitting upright in the kitchen table perfectly attending, they can, they're little kindergartners, it's okay to move. So I think just like setting up that expectation as well.
Yeah, we talk about that, like full body listening and how they can be movers in listening and how to utilize it. Do you have an answer that you tell parents of like why that happens? Like why is my child not able to sit still? What's happening in their body? How do you explain it?
It's hard to give a blanket answer just because every child's so different and they have a different combination of like, is it their auditory and their visual and their vestibular? But basically a blanket answer would be it's most likely because they're not processing vestibular information, which is our movement system in our inner ear. And if they're wiggling a lot, it probably means that they're not registering movement as efficiently. So they need more movement to feel that. And then that's why they're presenting with this behavior of a lot of movement, because they're not feeling the same. Like that, those 10 jumping jacks that I just did don't feel the same to him. Right. They need like a half hour of like moving around, jumping, climbing, crashing, and then their bodies can satiate and feel like, okay, now I feel settled, now I feel grounded. And a lot of times kids that need movement like that, they tend to seek movement that's actually disorganizing to them. So they may be the kid that's spinning in circles in the living room, but then that may be the movement they need, but also that's not going to help them focus and sit. That's going to increase their arousal. So we actually need to present them with more grounding, calming strategies, such as a proprioceptive input, which is the tight hugs, the weighted lap weights, what else? Like being squished between pillows, or also active proprioception, like pressing really hard against the wall. I like to call it make the room bigger. You press really, really hard against the wall, lean your whole body. Yeah. And that gives you a lot of input into your joints, which can be very calming and grounding.
As we're talking, we know that there's so many variables. Do you see any patterns that you talk to parents about in terms of like, okay, but why did that happen to my child? Like as a psychologist, I help them understand like the development from birth onwards. But I hear parents, for instance, this week, a mom asked me, okay, but what caused her to have the vestibular issues? Like, why couldn't she be held sideways as a baby? She always wanted upright. What was going on there?
Right. I mean, I think I mean, you can get really deep into the neurology of all of it, but it is, their brains are literally mapped differently. You know, their sensory systems developed differently in the womb. I mean, the sensory systems are one of the first things to develop, actually. But you can just say, yeah, sensory integration therapy helps remap the brain. So by providing them with these experiences in a structured, organizing, functional way, then their brains actually start to develop more functional pathways to help them process movement or tactile information or auditory information, visual, all of that, to have a more functional skill level.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think another question parents often ask is, what if we didn't do this? Like, it just looks like you're bouncing, or it just looks like they're playing. Like,
right.
What if they didn't do it? What would happen? Do you have
Right.
an answer that you say?
I think they would struggle a lot more as the skills requirements increase. For example, they may be just that active kid in kindergarten, but then what happens in second grade and they didn't develop the core strength to sit upright, and they're having to sit there and listen and then copy off the board and then pause and then listen to the teacher and then write some more and then go sit here quietly, and then that's like an hour and a half and finally I get to move. That's not going to work. You know, you're the kid that's under the table in second grade, and then you really look different rather than in kindergarten where everybody's wiggly. So yeah, I think it's just as the academic level increases, the challenges will increase and they won't have that foundation that they needed.
Right. It's great to hear, because I have the similar language, and even just that, in a more conversational way, it does look cute when they're little, but then as they get older, as adorable as they are at every age, it's not as cute,
Yeah, more difficult, and they're more distracting in classrooms when everybody's supposed to be sitting quietly at a table, and you have this one kid that can't.
My other big conversation that comes up with parents is that child who perceives threats so intensely when the family and the teachers and at home, the siblings, they're like, nothing really happened. It wasn't really that hard, or it wasn't really that bad. Right. And really supporting them. I imagine if they're not getting the support, then they're integrating these messages every day, moment to moment, that there's threats. And that creates that anxiety as they get older, because it doesn't feel good in the world. Versus getting these activities, which happen to also be fun, they also feel good, and then their body's like, oh, wait a minute, there's not a threat anymore. Like,
right. And slowly building on that, like a little bit of, say, tactile, for example, okay, first we're going to a kid that's really defensive tactily. Here's the shaving cream in front of you. You just have to tolerate it being there. Mm-hmm. And then, okay, now we're going to use a paintbrush, and now we're going to poke it with our finger, and now we're going to put our whole hand in and then wipe off right away. Like baby steps all the way to getting your hands in there and it's like really messy, or paint or whatever it is. So yeah, just increasing their tolerance, really.
Absolutely.
With any of the sensory systems.
And it's so great because these are all accessible at home for parents. Like even that example, it's like something that someone could do if they knew, okay, how do I graduate up these levels? Like, how do I increase the exposure, and what should I expect of my child at the beginning? Am I really putting their hands straight in, or is it just about tolerating it in front of them to get that support? And then it's something they can have this experience with their child. So lovely.
Yeah. And I think that's where the art of occupational therapy comes in. Occupational therapy, I like to think of as an art and a science, because we have all the science about the brain and the sensory systems and the motor systems and praxis and all that. But then how do we take all that science and actually apply it to a kid? And it's that art of like, this child is here and I need to start here rather than throw all this information at them. And just, it's really a dance with the child. So like I said in the very beginning, it's hard to give a blanket statement because every child, every sensory system is very unique, and we all are. And we all have, I think that's what parents also forget, is we all have sensory systems, not just the kid that has difficulty with processing sensory. We all do. We all have learned little sensory strategies. Maybe we tap our foot when we're listening, or maybe we fiddle with a pen, or even bite on a pen, or little things that are not really noticeable, but those are sensory strategies. Maybe I need that proprioceptive through my jaw when I'm biting on my pencil or whatever it is to calm me so I can focus on whatever Zoom meeting I'm on, or
Yeah,
whatever I'm working on.
even how we prepare, how we get out of bed every day, the order of how we get ourselves ready. These are all things that are supporting us to sustain our day.
Do we have
And
our coffee or our tea, or do we go for a run, or?
right, and our little ones are still developing those systems, those
Exactly.
cycles. Yeah, I had a client recently explore if a child has an injury, like they're falling or bumping into things a lot. Typically they go to pediatrician, typically they go get their eyes checked, but again, maybe more pediatrician, less about teaming and vestibular. And also kind of thinking about, oh, that might just be how they are. Like, oh, it's a clumsy child.
Right.
And I think what's so wonderful is we're in this age where this time frame where we actually know there's so much more. We don't have to just put a label on a child and say, oh, you're the introvert, or you're the clumsy kid, or you're the lazy kid. Like that can, I do away with those labels and say, actually it's movement, and what can we do with it?
Right.
So I want to encourage families like that, like as you start to see these habits, like, oh, I just have this silly wackadoo child that bumps into things. What about the vestibular system? How does that play into it? Right. And I was just curious of your thoughts. If you heard a child's bumping into things a lot, what might be something that you explore with that kind of assessment or way?
Right, right. Well, a child who's bumping into things, it's a combination. It's proprioception, which is your awareness of your body in space and how fast or hard you move your body, and then also your vestibular, which is your balance, and then also probably visual, because the visual and vestibular combine together very closely. And so we would probably start looking at those three things. And to give an example of, say, I've never met this child, they come into my clinic and I observe them. What are they gravitating towards? A child like that will most likely run and crash into my pillow pit or onto my trampoline, because they like, if you crash really hard in something, you know that your hand's there, you know your body's there. And it feels good too, because if you get squished under the pillows and you're like, now I'm really here, I'm getting that pressure. Here I am, here's my body, here's the pillow. Whereas you and I, or people in general who have better sensory processing, that, like, for example, if I reach out, I'm going to hit my computer, and I know how close and how hard, and I can't hit it hard because I'll break it, things like that. So kids that don't have these systems processing correctly, then they literally don't know, they don't perceive where that wall is. So that's why they're running into it, because maybe visually, or they're not even using their visual system to see that wall, or maybe they just don't know how fast they're going, or things like that. So it's all intertwined for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then do you, in your experience, I know there's so many different ways to practice, but might you start where that child is, or would you start with helping them learn what is needed? Like, okay, this is where this starts and this is where you are.
Right. I think what I would do is provide them with a lot of what we call heavy work and a lot of deep pressure. So in the sessions, we would do a lot of climbing, which heavy work is things where you have to use your muscles, just like if we're lifting weights. Yep. So pressing against the wall, carrying heavy objects, like dragging big pillows, jumping and crashing into things, climbing the rock wall. So that's all heavy work. And then deep pressure is passive. So a lot of squishes under pillows, a lot of tight hugs, things like that, all in functional play. So that's really going to give a lot of feedback to the child's proprioceptive system and help them, their muscle memory and their proprioceptive system start understanding where they are in space, how their muscles are working, things like that. And then that will start increasing their body awareness, which is one of the main functions of proprioception is body awareness.
I really admire how this work really sets the child up. So it looks like it's the building blocks. You're like really starting with what the body needs. So the body starts to receive it and feel good, for lack of another way of saying it, really feel organized, integrated. And then it's like, okay, well now since I feel this way, I can do what's required of my body and my mind.
Right. And once they're organized, then you can add on higher level things like, okay, now let's go on the balance beam and play this game, or let's go sit at the table and do some coloring, or things like that. When they're grounded, organized, they can actually focus and do higher level skills.
I know that, again, there's so many variables of what could happen, but I often see kiddos like this who it seems like the heavy work is really tiring. Like it's
Yeah.
a lot of work just to sit up, or it's a lot of work to lay on the ground and lift their hips. It's a lot of work to sit and lay on their belly and hold their neck up. And so there's lots of movement. So it seems like, oh, but they're moving, they must be strong because they're physically like running and spinning and rolling. But that when it comes to just like holding a position or following a sequence, it's like they'll say, I'm tired. It's hard.
Yeah, and that's where the core strength comes in, because, and that's the thing too, a lot of parents are like, oh, my kid's so good at sports, but then they come in and they can't balance on one foot.
Right.
So things like that. So it's that dynamic balance versus static balance, and that goes into more of the motor skills that are related to sensory. Basically, if you need a very strong core to sit up in a chair, it just simply, we don't think about that. But you know, the kid that doesn't have a strong core, they're leaning on their desk, they're slouching in their chair, they're rolling over, and when you're exhausted just by sitting there, how are you going to focus on doing your work or whatever it is?
Right. Or that big challenge happens, how do you problem solve, because you're already in a disadvantaged place.
Exactly. Yeah, you're already exhausted from just doing the bare minimum of sitting there, and then something's frustrating, and then you really have a meltdown.
I have to say, it's a thin line to kind of assess. This is why we go to experts like you, because it looks like, oh, but the kid's moving all the time, they're not tired.
Yeah,
because they're like increasing movement, but it's like how they're moving and when they're moving and the quality of it. There's all these nuances, but again, what you're saying about being able to coach and guide the parents of how to read that is so essential. And I imagine it would allow them to have so much more, as we mentioned before, ease at home.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree. A lot of buzzwords like proprioception and sensory processing and all that, but it doesn't really matter if you know the terms or not. It's just the strategies and my kid feels like this, so I'm going to do this.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I see that where it's about also the finessing of like, you might do it one day and then change and keep adapting as the child's growing and getting older. So it's not just a one size fits all, like just insert this, but really evolving with the child and within that frame of what's going on, what's the expectation.
Right. Really encouraging parents to read their children because they know them inside and out, but learning to read them in a different way, in a sensory processing kind of way of they're not just being silly, they're not just being frustrated or difficult, having a big reaction to something that's nothing, whatever, it's like they need support. They can't help it. They do feel this way. They're not just being bad or whatever, they need support in a certain way. So
and again, it just brings it all back to this time being an opportunity. We had to put that the good part to all this pandemic is that we have an opportunity to really support each other and be together in the home and really get an idea of like, this is what drives my child and this is what motivates me as a parent and an educator. And I really see so many opportunities. I know that when parents start to work with OTs, I know they quickly then develop skills and ideas for their other children, as well as for themselves. And I often hear parents go, oh my gosh, I do that too, or I needed that as well. So I know that this really supports the whole family.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. When the parents start to understand their own sensory systems, they can really apply it. That's why I really like to give examples of adult daily life that is a sensory experience. For example, like driving in traffic or something, and you're really stressed and you're running around, and then you go and you arrive at home and somebody walks up behind you and places their hand on your shoulder and you're just like, ah, and then that's a tactile experience that normally wouldn't bother you, but because your arousal level is so high already from your stress and just busyness, that feels like a big feeling when somebody's just gently tapping you. So that a lot of times kids feel sensory input that way. So I just like to frame that to parents is we all have these sensory experiences, and some of us experience it more intensely or less than others. So
right, so helpful. How can our families and educators find you and learn more about you?
Well, you can email me at KinderClinic.OT at gmail.com. My website is still under construction, but it'll be up soon. That's KinderClinic.com.
Thanks so much, Courtney. I look forward to collaborating with you.
Thank you. Definitely. Goodbye.